Hey everybody, welcome back to Conscientious Omnivore. My name is Pal. Today I'm going to do a quick video about 3 books that have changed my life. And I'm a big proponent of reading. I think everybody should read more. In today's day and age, it's really easy to get lost in all that kind of digital media and lose sight of how great books are. But there's a lot of information and wealth of knowledge that you can gain from books. And you can, of course, read electronic books or PDF files or whatever, but the point is that a lot of great knowledge is out there, and with technology, it's never been easier to get it. So I really recommend everybody read more, and I just wanted to share 3 books again that, for me were really pivotal and changed my life, or came into my life at the right times to really have a big impact on me. So I'm going to start with the first one. Not necessarily in the order that I read them, but just in kind of a way that I want to have the flow of the conversation go here. So the first one that I want to mention is called In Defense of Food. It was written by Michael Pollan. This book, I would say, even though I don't agree with everything in it now, it was probably the single most important thing I'd ever read as far as goes to how it influenced my food choices and what I thought about when I was eating. So I think prior to that, I'd already read a bunch of stuff like, various diet books or like nutrition books. I had even been a, proponent of the Atkins diet a while back, before that. And, so yeah, it just kind of ran the gamut from a whole bunch of different kinds of things. But when I read this book, I mean, it really changed the way I thought about food and the way I thought about, what was healthy and the way I thought about nutrition and kind of things like that. Just in a couple words, what the book does is it basically goes through and it makes a case that he's trying to defend the idea of food, and makes a case that a lot of what people eat nowadays is not even food. It's just processed so far beyond what would be recognizable as food to our ancestors, or even just going back a couple generations. That's a big cause of the the health problems that we have. So he starts kind of making the case that, like, if you pretended like you could somehow go into the supermarket with your great grandmother, and if she doesn't recognize it as food, it's not food. Don't buy it. Don't eat it. So things that have ridiculous amounts of ingredients, unpronounceable, chemicals, preservatives, additives, all sorts of things that you just don't even know what the heck it is. It's probably not good for you. Put it back, get something else. And there's a lot of great stuff in this book where, he makes the case that, like, when you go shopping, look at the layout of the supermarket. It's the first time I ever noticed these kinds of things where, like, the periphery of the supermarket is kind of where things tend to be the healthiest. The center aisles tend to be not so healthy. That's where all the processed foods that store forever kind of tend to be. So if you go into a supermarket, usually, like, you'll start in a corner. It'll have all your, like, fruits and veggies and all the fresh kind of produce that are actually good for you and healthy. And then of course you also have, like, your cooled areas where it's like your frozen things, and also of course, like, your animal product things, which tend to go bad as well. So your meats, your dairy, and all this kind of stuff. I think just logistically, it's usually easier for the stores to get all the things that require cooling and electricity and all this kind of stuff to be kept on the periphery. And then the center aisles of the store are where you have all your, like, processed things that store forever. So your, like, really processed cereal grains, or your, like, cookies and all this kind of stuff that's, like, really junk food for the most part. Obviously this can vary in your store. It's not like a hard set rule, but it just got me kind of thinking about this of, like, what is food. And like I said, I'd already been health conscious before reading that, but when I started really reading labels, and not just out of, like, random curiosity of, like, oh, I wonder what's in here, it was more like I really wanted to know, like, what am I taking into my body? That's when I first really got into this idea that, like, you really have to know what you're eating. And even to the point of, like, before that, I don't think I'd ever looked at, like, the ingredients on a loaf of bread. You just assume that you know. And there were things in there that in the book that talks about the food laws as they were, like, for example, in the U.S. up until, like, the 1930s, they had laws that required manufacturers, if they changed the ingredients from what was commonly known or commonly held to be the the ingredients of said item, like in bread, most people knew that it was like flour, yeast, salt, water, that's it. If there was anything else that you were going to add to it, you had to basically label your product as imitation whatever. So if you changed out some of the flour and put in some type of emulsifier and added something like like some process like other flour helper or whatever, some raising agents, whatever, that were not what people would assume would be the standard ingredients for the bread, you couldn't sell it as bread. You'd have to sell it as imitation bread. Same thing if you had like butter, you wanted that to be from milk fat. If you had anything else in there, you couldn't label it as butter. You'd have to label it as imitation butter. And then in the 30s, I forget the exact year, they reversed that law. That the food lobby basically made it such that if they could prove that it was nutritionally equivalent, you didn't have to label it as an imitation product, and then you could just call it whatever. So you could have like your bread, for example, made from all sorts of different chemicals and additives and whatever, and you could still label it as bread. So that's like a really interesting thing that got me, more to open my eyes about kind of how these big lobbying efforts go from these big corporations, and really started looking at the labels. And it was a really eye-opening time. I think I remember like having arguments even with like family or loved ones, and being like, no, don't eat that, it's junk. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's bread. And I'm like, read the ingredients. There's like 17 things in there, and it's like, it shouldn't be in there. And why does my mustard have 15 things and dyes and artificial colors and flavors and preservatives when you can just make it with just like 3 basic ingredients? So anyway, that book was really instrumental, really got me kind of looking into nutrition more. And the last thing that I want to say about that book that was really cool for me was that it talked about this idea that scientists are always trying to figure out the one little thing that makes something healthy. So they know that broccoli is good for you. Well, that's not good enough. It's not good enough for them to tell you to eat broccoli and be happy with the results. They want to figure it out, and the reason for that is, of course, that they want to monetize that somehow. You don't make much money off of just selling people broccoli. If you can figure out what chemical is in there that's making a health impact, that's a positive change, then you can put that in a pill and sell it because people just want to fix all their problems with pills. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in that book. Obviously, now I follow, a vegan diet and lifestyle. I wouldn't recommend everything from this book as a, as like a, 100% accurate based on what I know now. And, a little bit of the book is heavily biased from Weston Price, kind of doing his studies, and there is a little bit of kind of like meat and, dairy promotion in there. So I don't agree with those things anymore, but that's, neither here nor there. I did find that book to be very powerful and was really kind of important for me in my journey of learning, what is really good and what I want to be putting in my body. So I definitely recommend it to anybody. I think that's a good book, and it was important for me. Next book is I wanted to talk about is Dean Carnazzi's Ultramarathon Man, Confessions of a Midnight Runner. Now, this book came along in my life when I had gone through kind of like an up and down period where I was kind of physically fit, then I got fat, and then I had just started getting back into fitness again, and I started running. I had my best friend at the time really got me kind of hooked on doing these little 5K races, and it was really cool. So I got more and more into it, and there was some of my coworkers that were into running, and there were some people trying to get me to do a half marathon, and then my buddy said, okay, we'll do a full marathon, and another friend of mine who had also gotten into running really heavily said, you should check out this book, and recommended it. So then I went and I read this book, and it was just like crazy. I couldn't believe the stories in there. And if anybody is into kind of running, I think this book is just fantastic. You'll read it and just want to go out for a run, and you'll probably want to go out for an ultra marathon at some point. It's really crazy, and great stories. Dean Carnazzi's, if you've ever seen him in interviews, he's a really interesting character. He's got a good way of telling stories, and he's done some pretty amazing feats, and talented runner for sure. And so you know, just I remember like reading this book and just getting all fired up and using it as like really good motivation to get myself out there and want to run, and even more than that, I mean, I think there's just a certain way that he tells the story where you really kind of understand this this idea of like what running can be for somebody, and this elusive, you know, runner's high that people talk about, the way that it can influence your life for the better, and yeah, just great stories, and just you know, things that you can relate to if you've ever done any kind of, you know, running yourself. So I would recommend that. There's a great story, the way the book starts out, where, you know, he's running an ultramarathon, and he orders a pizza and a cheesecake, and you know, he's telling the dispatcher like, meet me on corner of this and that, and the guy's obviously confused because like, why would you know, not order it to a house address? And he's there, he gets the stuff, and he's running along like eating the cheesecake and the pizza, and in the middle of the race, and he's doing some 200-mile race or whatever, and it's just this crazy story, and that's how the book starts. So again, recommended read, not necessarily agreeing with every thing as far as like, you know, diet or ethical stance at this point, but just something that for me was like really influential and got me you know, pumped to do more running, and wanted to do like ultra distances, and find where that you know, that like special places in my own running where, you know, you find yourself. So I don't know, that was a good one. So that was number 2. Number 3, third book I wanted to tell you about is kind of one that I really recommend, and it's really pertinent to this channel specifically, is that because it has to do with like you know, growing food and kind of agriculture. So this one is called The One Straw Revolution, and it was written by Masanobu Fukuoka. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, a Japanese man. And yeah, Fukuoka's book is just incredible. I mean, it really is a revolutionary you know, book and topic. For me, it came into my life right around the time that I was transitioning and deciding that I'm going to become, you know, a vegan. And it just really opened my eyes to the way that like farming like is done, and why and how, and just tons and tons of stuff like changed in my life right around the time that I was reading that. And it just like really resonated deeply with me. I mean, I read that book, and it was like wow, my mind was blown. Like, it was really, really revolutionary, and I just love that book. I mean, I've recommended it to everybody I know since then, and it's almost like I want everybody to read it. I really think everybody should read it, so that we all have a better idea of kind of where and how our food can come from, and how a lot of the things that we do. Okay, so sorry, I ran out of space. I had to start it over again. Where I got cut off was that a lot of the things that we do as humans is we basically try and figure out solutions to problems that we've created, and kind of done so unwittingly, and we just don't realize it. There's this fantastic story that Fukuoka tells that you know, that says that basically modern agriculture is like the poor scientist who goes into his like research laboratory and works and works and works day and night trying to, you know, do his invention, and then basically, you know, at the end he's worked so much and just his health has deteriorated, his eyesight is now poor, and what has he discovered? He's discovered glasses. You know, and it's like that's like the classic case that you see in you know, in agriculture. You see people like trying to make use of you know, artificial chemicals, fertilizers, etc., to basically boost production, do things in totally unnatural ways, using monocultures, which means like just growing all the same thing in one place, and then being, you know, they're all susceptible because they're genetically identical. They're all susceptible to the same illnesses, the same bugs, the same pests. So then you have to come up with pesticides, then you have to come up with this, that, the other. Then you've created another problem where you're poisoning something else. Then, you know, basically the whole 9 yards. Everything is just this, you know, trying to fix something that if you just let nature work the way it's supposed to, you wouldn't have to fix it. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in that book. He really kind of lays out the information, calling into question the science that you know, a lot of these, you know, big industries want you to believe, but is actually not true. So things about yields being improved by, you know, doing more mechanization, more chemicals, where the opposite is actually the truth. You know, you're destroying your topsoil, you're removing the nutrients, the minerals, the helpful bacterias, all sorts of living organisms that are in the soil there that would be making a better and healthier food for you. You're destroying that by basically using all these modern agricultural techniques, and you're getting less return for the farmers because they have so much higher expenditure for all the equipment, all the chemicals, all the work that goes into growing your food, and they have less return as a result because yes, they do grow a higher yield, but the cost has been so much higher that they actually make less from it. And this, if you just don't know anything about farming, just look at the fact that over the past whatever it is, since we've had modern agriculture, 100 years or whatever, farmers are a dying breed. I mean, the people doing like the traditional little farms that we're led to believe are still there are just becoming fewer and fewer and farther in between. Nobody really, has that kind of, thing anymore. Like everybody's doing these, Monsanto crops, like tons of chemicals, tons of pesticides, fertilizers, and the farmers, even as a result of this, are making less and less money. The only reason why some of them are still in business is because of the government subsidies. So it's really interesting. And this guy was doing his research, back in like the 50s in Japan, and was able to show that he could make comparable yields using what he called the do nothing farming, which was basically allowing nature to do and operate the way things are intended to. So clever alternation of cover crops for your fields, making sure that you don't plow, you don't have the soil be disturbed, and the topsoil be basically broken down with all these tilling and the chemicals, and for his case like the farming of rice with the flooding. So yeah, just tons and tons of stuff in there. And there's even been some recent research where they've shown that rice farming produces a lot of like methane because of the way they're doing the flooding. But if you do the no-till, no-flooding method, you can actually reduce a lot of that as well. So there's like really tons of benefits. The man was incredible. For a future video, I'll do some other books, but I think I just wanted to keep it to 3 to make sure this doesn't get too long. It's already pretty long. But yeah, my brother got me this book, and yeah, I couldn't believe it. I mean, he had, my brother's been into gardening for a lot longer than me, and pretty much his whole life he's been really into like plants and chilies and all sorts of cool stuff like in the garden. And for me, it was always like I enjoyed the eating of the food coming from the garden, but not necessarily the work that went into it. And I was never really like one to be into gardening and really think of being like a farmer. And but now I think it's like one of the most noble things you could do is to like grow food for yourself and your family and your friends and your loved ones. So yeah, this book really just opened my eyes to see that and to really want to do that. And that's like a huge motivation for why I'm doing this channel as well, is that I want to share that kind of knowledge and kind of joy that I get out of eating healthy, nutritious fruits and veggies that ideally would come out of your own backyard. And yeah, this book just really is a revolution, so I would definitely recommend that. So there you go. I think that's it for today's video. I just wanted to give you the 3 books and how and why they've changed my my life. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please remember to give it a like and subscribe, share with your friends, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.